Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. India-Pakistan relations can be volatile, inexplicable and unpredictable. And that's certainly true of what's happened in the last 1 week. Last Friday, we had the joint statement in Uffa and the belief that a new chapter could be opening. But 4 days later, serious cross-border firing erupted, leading to the Indian NSA stepping in, which hasn't happened before. Consequently, today, we really don't know where relations stand, nor what the future looks like. So how do we make sense of the last 7 days, and what can we say of the future? Over the next 1 hour, we shall try and assess the sharp ups and downs we witnessed in the last week. With me is India's former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Satyabrat Pal, former Foreign Secretary Krishnan Srinivasan, and former Army Chief General Ved Prakash Malik. Joining us from Lahore, former High Commissioner to India, Aziz Ahmed Khan, and the well-known political and defence analyst, Hassan Askari Rizvi. Satyabrat Pal, in an article that you wrote for TheWire.in, you predicted that the Uffa statement would lead to stepped-up cross-border firing and LOC violations. And that's precisely what's happened 3 days later. What led you to make that confident prediction, which turned out to be almost completely correct?
Well, I had linked it not just to the Uffa statement, but also to what's going to happen over the next couple of months. And there's been a pattern to this, that any time there's been an attempt to improve relations, but to take it forward only so far and no more, and at the same time you have the UN General Assembly going into an important session. You've had a history of the Pakistan Army, or those sections of the Pakistan Army that are completely opposed to any sort of rapprochement, stepping up violence just before the General Assembly, which meets in September. So given that pattern, it seems to me almost inevitable that this is what would happen.
So in other words, this is a repeat of what we've seen previously, and that's one reason why it's not surprising.
Absolutely.
It fits into a pattern.
Certainly anyone who's followed all this, it's absolutely predictable.
Hassan Askari Rizvi, to what extent is the firing that we've witnessed a direct result of Pakistan's belief that the Uffa statement, A, leans in India's favour, and B, has undermined Pakistan's stand on Kashmir because it doesn't mention the word at all? In fact, one of your previous High Commissioners to this country, Ashraf Jahangir Qazi, writing for The Dawn, actually called the Uffa statement a disaster. Is that one reason why we're seeing this firing?
No, I don't think so. This kind of perception can be directly linked with the firing. I think the problem is that both countries are showing two faces. One to the international community, because, you know, it was Uffa and there was the meeting of Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, and all the major power were encouraging both India and Pakistan to at least talk to each other, if not resolve the problem. So they showed the polite face. They want to engage with each other. That's what they did. Now, when it comes to home, then I think in both sides you have problems. In Pakistan, I think one problem was mentioned from your side, although one can question that, but nevertheless, let that go.
Can I interrupt?
But, you know, even...
Can I interrupt? How do you speak to your own audience at home when you step up firing across the border or the LSC to India? What are you saying to your audience at home if that's the reason why the firings happen?
Well, I would argue that it fits into the pattern of violations of ceasefire that have started from 2013, because the ceasefire was effected in November 2003 and everything was fine, with some incident until 12, and from 13 the incidents have started. And then secondly, I would talk about the political profile of the present day BJP. Present day BJP is very different from the BJP of Vajpayee days, and since the Prime Minister relies heavily on ultra-nationalism for domestic reasons, and also leans too heavily towards the political far-right religious groups, and if you promote ultra-nationalism, that has to be anti-Pakistan in one way or the other.
Let me bring in Krishnan Srinivasan. You're a former Foreign Secretary. How do you respond to this belief expressed by Hassan Rizvi, a renowned Pakistani political analyst, that part of the background that explains the exchange of fire across the LOC and the international border that we've seen for pretty often, I would say a year, is in fact the nature of the government in Delhi. It's hostility, if that's the correct word, to Pakistan.
I'm not sure that I accept that view, but certainly this is a recurring situation that we are dealing with. I seem to remember that we've had this repeated again and again in the past, and I think it's time, you know, that we came to terms with this situation. It does unleash a tremendous number of sentiments on both sides of the border from people who are opposed to normalization of talks. In some ways, I think that we've got to overcome these problems. We've got to decide what actually is important and necessary for us to move forward in engagement. And if we keep getting bogged down with these situations on the line of control on the international border, we're never going to actually start a reasonable interchange of opinion.
Absolutely.
But of course, we'll be coming to that later in your program.
Absolutely. I want to stay for a while on what happened on the border and how that relates to what happened in Uffa before I broaden the discussion and talk about how do we move on. General Malik, Pakistan for its part claims that in fact India started the firing. Now, even if the Pakistani claim that they've shot down an Indian drone is wrong, and we perhaps have demonstrably proved to the world it's wrong, can we be sure who started the firing? Because the impression many people have is that both the forces on either side can be at times fairly trigger happy. The smallest incidents can lead to firing. So can we be sure they started it and not us?
No, you know, one can never be very certain that who started the firing, because it's a long border, and when troops are eyeball to eyeball facing each other, you do have all these problems. But you know, I must indicate to you the institutional arrangements that is there on either side. As far as India is concerned, the Indian military, paramilitary forces as well as the army would immediately follow the directions that have come down from the political leadership. That doesn't happen often on the other side. In fact, there is always, I have noticed there is always some delay, particularly when you find that Pakistan army is not on board with the political statement that have been made on the other side. It has happened quite often earlier, and therefore I am not quite surprised that the provocation, or I would say unprovoked firing, came from the other side. Okay. And the other instance of the drone, for example, now that was a deliberate act, because we do not have that kind of drone. The military doesn't possess those drones, and there is no reason for anybody to fly that small 2-kilometer range drone from our side. So taking everything together, I think that yes, there was unprovoked firing this time. We had one lady who got killed from the firing, and there is an institutional difference in our you know, political and military relations on both sides.
So what do you make of this drone incident?
Well, to a complete layman, it doesn't make sense at all. It simply doesn't make sense, because if, as our Foreign Secretary and others have explained, this is not something in the inventory of the Indian Armed Forces, it's hard to see any civilian flying that drone there, and if it serves no particular purpose, it's again difficult to see why that drone should be there. So it's entirely possible, as our people have said, that this may have been shot down by accident by the Pakistanis, and it's.
So would the Pakistan army make such a silly mistake to shoot down by accident their own traffic drone?
If it's a drone that's flying overhead, and all it needs is a soldier opening fire with even with a Kalashnikov, it'll probably be able to down it.
Krishna Lavasan, unfortunately that line to Islamabad is still lost to us. There is a lot of speculation on the Indian side that what we are seeing on the border is a reflection of dissonance within the Pakistani system. It's a reflection of the fact that the Pakistani army is not altogether happy with the outcome at Uffa. They're not happy with what they believe could be some sort of potential rapprochement with India. The Pakistanis strenuously deny that interpretation, but as someone who's closely followed Pakistan from the days when you were Foreign Secretary, do you think that could be a substantial part of the explanation for what's happened in the last 7 days, the huge U-turn that we've seen between Uffa and now?
Well, it could be, but I'm not sure that this speculation is really going to get us anywhere. This is the kind of received wisdom that we've been having for really a very long time in India, but it hasn't actually been very productive. I think that it's time to, as I perhaps said before, I think it's time to get over these.
Can I stop you there? I'll get over these in a moment's time, but for now I want to productively pursue what others believe is perhaps pointing at the truth. And I'll come back to you in a moment. I've got the Pakistani guests with me. Before I lose them, let me go to them. Aziz Ahmed Khan, I'm going to go slightly back in the story to the question I asked you earlier, which you weren't there to answer. It's to do with the drone that Pakistan has shot down. The Indian view is that, first of all, this is not an Indian drone. Secondly, it has no military value whatsoever. And thirdly, many in India believe that perhaps accidentally you shot down a Pakistani Punjab police traffic drone. How do you respond to the Indian stand on this issue? Because it's one of the most intriguing things that's happened in the last few days.
Yes, I will go by what the Pakistani side has said, and they say that it is an Indian drone that they have shot down. I suppose more details would be coming out later. The ISPR will speak about it, and we will find out exactly what the situation is. But for the moment, for us, it is an Indian drone that has come in, violated Pakistani airspace and has been shot down, and we have to stick by that story.
But you're simply saying that because you believe, as a loyal Pakistani, you must accept what your government says, and that's the sole reason you're accepting it.
It's not a question of loyalty. I mean, I have no other means to verify I have no other means to verify if I had some kind of an arrangement or facility through which I could verify whether your claim is right or my government's claim is right. I would employ that. But for the moment, there is a statement from the government of Pakistan. They have shot down the plane, the object, and they say that it is an Indian drone.
But the Indian foreign,
that is it, and it should not
can I interrupt? The Indian Foreign Secretary has made it clear. First of all, this is believed to be a DJ-3 Phantom Chinese-made drone. The company itself says that they've never sold this to the Indian government. The Indian government says that it doesn't have such a drone in its inventory. Surely those are good, convincing arguments from the Indian side to prove that this is not an Indian drone.
That this matter can be very easily resolved through diplomatic channels. They should immediately get in touch with each other. You have your High Commissioner here, we have our High Commissioner there. The facts can be brought to each government's notice, and the matter discussed and resolved.
General Malik,
rather than making,
General Malik, how confident are you that this is not the sort of drone that the Indian Army in any shape or form would ever use? Because the intriguing question that I put a moment ago to Satyabrat Pal is, would the Pakistanis make such a silly mistake as to shoot down a Punjab police traffic drone?
Look, I'm very, very confident that the Indian armed forces do not possess that kind of drone. I know the kind of UAVs that are possessed by the Indian Army, Navy and the Air Force. And some of them were purchased during my time also. So I'm quite certain about it. Second thing is that somebody shooting down that kind of a drone, which is a very small object, obviously it must have been flying very low, and once some soldier has brought it down, it was not a major action that took place. And thereafter, what happens is that at that unit level, people, first thing is that they think that it has come from the other side. And that kind of rumor can spread very easily. It can happen on both sides.
Okay, let's then move beyond the drone to something that we were touching on earlier and we then interrupted ourselves, and that's to do with the belief, Satyabrat Pal, that the Pakistan Army could be involved behind it, either because they want to express dissonance over what happened in Uffa, or because of other internal discords that they have with the Nawaz Sharif government. In the article that you wrote for thewire.in, you say, and I'm quoting you, the Pakistan Army still sees India as a threat, which it can try to neutralize through terrorism, which is also cheap, and it will not give it up. Do you think the Pakistan Army's hand or the ISI's hand is visible behind what's been happening on the LOC in the international border?
Well, our army seems to have said that the latest exchange started when they tried to stop an attempt to infiltrate. An infiltration with the support of the Pakistani army has been a fact of life at the border for the last 20 odd years. And so therefore, if infiltration continues, and if the Pakistani army is still laying down supporting fire to bring infiltrators in or send infiltrators over, then you have to concede or have to agree that the point being made here, that the Pakistani army's support for infiltration and for terrorism is unabated. That remains the case.
Hassan Asri Rizvi, one of your senior journalists, Mariana Babar, writing in the Hindu on the 15th, made it quite clear that she believed that army headquarters in Rawalpindi did not appreciate the tenor as well as the content of the Uffa statement. In particular, she said that the army headquarters in Pakistan felt that Nawaz Sharif had succumbed, and those were her words, succumbed to the Modi preference for limited engagement instead of standing by the old composite dialogue. Given that explanation from one of your journalists, many in India feel this is corroboration, if not proof, of the fact that your army's hand is behind what's happening on the border and the LOC. How do you respond to that view from Mariana Babar?
Well, one can see criticism of the Uffa statement by various circles in Pakistan, not merely military, but civilian circles have also criticized. But if you get into this kind of debate that how Pakistan decides things and what military is saying, what civilian leadership is saying, this becomes a good topic for newspaper articles. But if the problems have to be addressed, we need to recognize that in both countries you have people, you have organizations, you have groups that are opposed to improving relations with each other, and we'll have to work within the constraints that exist on both sides. There is a domestic side to this relationship. In India there is a domestic side, in Pakistan there is a domestic side. However, if the two governments, especially the Indian government, decides that the situation on the line of control will improve, it will improve, because the political leadership, if makes a very clear statement, I think that is obeyed on both sides, despite what you are saying, or most Indian writers say perhaps that army in Pakistan doesn't listen to anybody. Okay. But I think there is a problem at the highest political level to decide genuinely, honestly, with full consciousness that they want to improve relations. That's the problem.
General Malik, let me put to you the opposite view made by the Pakistanis, and the view goes something like this, that the Pakistan army at the moment is seriously involved in fighting terror in Waziristan and perhaps right the way across their western border as a whole. Therefore, at this point of time, the army in Pakistan wants peace, tranquility and calm on the eastern border. Many people believe that, in fact, when General Raheel Sharif, their army chief, went to Russia last month, he actually asked the Russians to help ensure peace and tranquility on the eastern border. Therefore, Pakistanis say it's less than credible to argue that the same army will be provoking trouble on the eastern front. How do you respond to that argument?
Karan, the fact is that there are a large number of camps, training camps still existing on the other side of the border. We keep getting continuous reports. The fact is that there has been infiltration which continues. So, in these matters, it is better to go by the situation on the ground rather than statements being made at the higher level, either by the politicians or even by some military officers. I go by the situation on the ground. The ground situation that I see, I feel that they have never attempted to stop infiltration, while they do not want a major escalation of these incidents that are taking place. They are trying to keep it under control, but the situation as far as infiltration from the other side is concerned, training jihadis or mujahideen, whatever you like to call them, inducting them into J&K, that has not stopped.
Do you think, Aziz Ahmed Khan, that there could be a possibility that your army, perhaps elements of your ISI, who are not in support and favor of the tone and tenor of Uffa are taking this action to ensure that some of the steps listed in Uffa, the meetings between the DGMOs, the meetings between the NSAs, and also the meetings at a much lower level between the DGs of the BSF and your Rangers, don't happen. It's not, and it would not be surprising for your army and the NS and your ISI to scupper political agreements that your civilian government has reached. Do you think it could be happening again?
I think the only way to counter this, to make a judgment on this kind of a line of thinking would be to try it out. I mean, why should you not try it out and see whether the agreements or understandings that were reached in Uffa, follow up on that action and see what happens. If what you imagine, or some of you in India imagine, that the Pakistani army would not allow or is not happy with what happened there, these follow-up meetings would not take place. For that, the army doesn't have to resort to unnecessary firing and creating tension on a border where they want the least of this kind of attention. At the moment, they are totally occupied on the western front, and they don't want any distraction on this side. And the government works in unison. It is not that if certain sections of Pakistani institutions are not happy with the situation, that the government will still push ahead. But the government of Pakistan has made it very categoric that they want to move forward in normalizing relations, and India has to take those steps. After all, when the ceasefire announcement was made in November 2003, it was unilateral from Pakistan, and for several years not a shot was fired. And infiltration levels and presence of what you call infiltrators in India, by your own admission and by your own accounts, is far less in Indian occupied Kashmir than it was earlier on. Your own authorities say that the incidents have gone down. The number of infiltrators are far less, if at all there are any. I don't think there are. But you are keeping certain myths alive. Test the Pakistani side out, move forward for the dialogue process, discuss things seriously, rather than this approach of point scoring.
That's a fair point you're making, and I will take it up in a big way. But before I do, I want to come back, Srinivasan, to the reason why many in India this time round have sat up and perhaps asked themselves the question, is the Pakistani or the ISI involved in some way behind what's happening? And the reason is to do with the way the news was broken in India yesterday. We discovered yesterday that the Indian National Security Advisor has spoken on 3 separate occasions to the Pakistan High Commissioner, on 2 occasions to our High Commissioner there, and then on top of that, our Foreign Secretary held a detailed briefing on television, which was announced a good hour before it happened. And those are steps and measures that we in India haven't taken. Are you surprised by the high level of the response from the Indian side to what, after all, has been happening on the border many times before and has happened periodically since August last year at least?
Yes, I am surprised, and for 2 reasons. One is that I think that we placed very high hopes on the Uffa meeting, and we felt that this was a platform where we could move forward in a very deliberate way. So I think that was one occasion for these relatively high-level interventions. The separate point of surprise to me was that we had no political person speaking or acting in this matter. All these activities, both verbal and in the media, seem to have come from civil servants. Now that is to me a surprise, maybe because I feel that the politicians perhaps are keeping their heads down in India because they want to have elbow room for maneuverability in future. If that is so, I think that is good. If, however, it means keeping their heads down to avoid responsibility, I think that's very unfortunate.
But you began very interestingly, Srinivasan, you began by suggesting that this very strong response that you were surprised by is a reflection of the fact that they had invested high hopes in the Uffa outcome. If that is the case, and I'm sure it is, were our politicians being gullible and far too trusting? Or was there some hidden assurance we don't know about that they got from Nawaz Sharif, which now clearly hasn't worked out to be the case?
Well, I think that you've got for the first time a document between the Prime Ministers of India and Pakistan, which set out, at least in a very limited way, I think in a relatively unsatisfactory way, a roadmap for the future. And I think that that did give some occasion for confidence that we could move forward. Therefore, these activities on the line of control and international border must have come as a really painful reminder that in Pakistan, perhaps, things are not as comfortable for the Prime Minister there as we thought they would be. But yet we do have a document between the two political leaders of the countries, and I feel we should build on that.
One more question, Satyabrat Pal, on the way India responded before I then turn and talk about the way forward. Are you surprised that the NSA stepped in, that he rang the Pakistan High Commissioner 3 times, our own High Commissioner twice? Because normally these are issues that the National Security Advisor doesn't handle. It's something that the Foreign Secretary handles. So are you surprised at the level at which the handling has happened?
Yes, I mean, that is unusual, because if the NSA was to speak, he should have spoken to his counterpart in Islamabad. And local interventions with the Pakistani High Commissioner are best left to our Foreign Secretary or to the head of the Pakistan desk. That has been the practice in the past. So
has the NSA somehow devalued the Foreign Secretary's role by stepping in himself and superseding it?
Well, in a way, he's devalued his own post, I think, by speaking to the High Commissioner, because it's not done.
All right, let's move now, gentlemen, to the question, what's the way forward? I want to quote to you, Aziz Ahmed Khan, what the Indian Foreign Secretary S. Jaishankar said yesterday at his press conference. If the intention or the inclination is to strengthen peace and tranquility on the border and do the meetings that we have agreed to do, we remain committed to that. If, on the other hand, there is unprovoked firing and there is infiltration and cross-border terrorism, then obviously the situation is different. So that choice is not ours. Those were his words. How do you respond to that? Because what he's saying is, as far as the future is concerned, the ball's in your court, not in the Indian court.
Well, the ball is in Indian court to the extent that India should then follow up on the meeting, that the agreement that we have we came to, or the understandings that we reached at Uffa, or earlier on also. The main point is that after in fact, even at the time of Prime Minister Modi's inauguration, when our Pakistani Prime Minister visited there, there was an agreement that the two foreign secretaries will meet and chart out a course for the future plan of action, how the negotiations would proceed, how the dialogue process would proceed. You have to make a start about that. So all Mr. Jaishankar needs to do is pick up the telephone, talk to his counterpart here in Pakistan and say, all right, I'm coming over, or you come over, let's meet and let's see how do we take the dialogue process forward. Because there was, India does not want the composite dialogue anymore, although it was India which started the composite dialogue and insisted on the format that we were following so far. But if you want to change that format, even then get down, sit across the table and suggest. But the fact should remain, one thing should be borne in mind, that it cannot be cherry picking. All subjects need to be discussed. But at the same time, or on the other hand, also Mr. Doval can pick up the telephone and invite his counterpart in Pakistan and say that please come over and let's see what we can do for future.
You know, General Malik, speaking from a military point of view, in the present circumstances, do you believe that it's in fact even more important that the Director Generals of the BSF and the Pakistan Rangers as well as the DGMO should meet? Because that's what was Uffa, although no date was set for that meeting. But now, after the exchanges we've had across the LOC and the international border, is it even more important they should meet, and should those meetings be expedited?
I agree with you, Karan. You see, I'm against not using the institutional arrangements that we've had for so many years. And we have been now speaking to each other across our border outposts. We have been speaking every week. There has been telephone calls between the DGMO. Sometimes it can happen more also. So I feel that under the present circumstances, you know, totally neglecting the institutional arrangements that we've had so far and jumping to the political level or even at the level of the NSAs may not be appropriate. We must keep those arrangements alive. And therefore, I feel it is more important for us to have a greater dialogue between the military to military at different levels.
Okay.
I would like to have, frankly, the meeting that took place in Minister Rajnath Singh's office yesterday, I wish that the army chief was also present there. And similarly, one would hope that the military on the other side is present when their political leaders are discussing or talking of these issues. I find that the military, which is responsible for keeping peace and tranquility along the line of control or the border, seems to be missing from both sides. I don't like that kind of an arrangement, frankly.
Very quickly, before we lose that line to Pakistan, Mr. Rizvi, the Indian side, and I'm judging by the comment made by Mr. Jaishankar, which I quoted a moment ago, seems to suggest that those meetings that were envisaged between the BSF and the Pakistani Rangers and between the DJMOs and even between the NSAs critically depends on Pakistan indicating a commitment to peace and tranquility. Will your government, in the interest of those meetings, indicate such a commitment? Will it make a statement? Will it come out in public and say, look, we stand committed to peace and tranquility, we want to go ahead?
Well, I think no matter what Pakistan says, it may not satisfy India. The question is not that Pakistan should come up and make a statement. There has been an understanding for engagement, not for talk at Uffa. And 3 meetings are planned. Those 3 meetings must take place. In addition to that, the regular institutional arrangement that has always been existing on the border, local commanders flag meeting and DGMOs, these should also continue. It is after those 3 meetings that we would know whether the dialogue can start or not. And for that purpose, there has to be a commonly shared agenda. If India thinks that agenda will be determined by India only, or Pakistan thinks agenda will be determined by Pakistan only, there will be no dialogue.
Okay.
Agenda has to be jointly prepared. All contentious issue from Indian point of view, contentious issues from Pakistani point of view should be put on the table and they should start the dialogue. Otherwise, they can engage in statements, counter statements, and that will never end.
Krishnavasan, I want to come back to the way I interpreted what I call the Indian government's attitude as reflected by Mr. Jaishankar's statement yesterday. When he ended by saying, the choice is not ours, he was basically suggesting the ball is in the Pakistani court, and that means that India is going to adopt a wait and see, let's see what they do, we'll then determine what happens thereafter. But that's a very passive sort of Indian response to the situation. As a former foreign secretary, do you think that sort of passive response, let's wait and see what the Pakistanis do, is the right response? Or would you like India to be a bit more active in trying to find out where does Pakistan stand, has its commitment to Uffa changed, so that we make more of an effort to move forward rather than just wait and see?
Yes, I think the Foreign Secretary's response was pro forma. But I think it was all right as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. I think what we really need is a decision on what are the preconditions to have a meaningful dialogue. And these preconditions have variously been, follow up on the Mumbai trial, the absence of terrorism, the tranquility on the LOC and the international border. But we've got to decide politically whether these are the preconditions or whether we can move ahead, because these conditions or the situation has lingered for 20, 25 years and we haven't made any progress. Now, I think that, candidly speaking, I referred to the Uffa statement as being good in parts earlier. We'll know soon whether Uffa is being implemented, because, as you know, in 15 days, fishermen were supposed to be released on both sides. We shall see whether that happens. But I think that the problem with the Uffa statement is that it gives far too much primacy to meetings at the official level. I think what we really need to do is to have a strong political will to move to a political level as fast as possible. And I think precisely the nature of this political engagement should be, as the US Secretary of State Kerry spent 18 days non-stop talking to the Iranians. I think we need something of that kind, a semi-permanent dialogue with a designated person from India and a designated person from Pakistan who will stay locked together and come to some decisions over an extended period. without interruption.
That's a very
irrespective of external forces.
That's a very interesting, if for some possibly even potentially controversial proposal you make. I want to pursue it first with you, Satyabrat Par, and then I want to go back to Pakistan and pursue it with Aziz Ahmed Khan, because both of you have been high commissioners in each other's countries, and you both have a clear understanding of how politicians both at home and in the other country would respond. Would politicians, A, take up the challenge of raising the dialogue to a political level and then making it semi-permanent, almost like Kerry handling Iran nuclear deal, as Krish Srinivasan was suggesting?
Well, you know, personally, I would agree with Mr. Srinivasan that it's an excellent idea. But I think at the moment, for our politicians, for our government, probably be a bridge too far because they've laid down preconditions. But could I say that if we wanted to diffuse the situation at the LOC and the IB, we have Eid coming up in 2 days. And there is a tradition of the border forces exchanging Eid gifts at a very high level. That's an excellent practical way of trying to get the two forces leadership together and try to make sure that at least temporarily, if nothing else, peace is restored at the border so that we can take the next steps.
General Malik, I want to bring you in and ask you both about Krish Srinivasan's proposal that in fact we need the dialogue to be raised to the political level. It needs to be made semi-permanent. It needs to be made conditional. Oh, I've got Pakistan with me. Forgive me, General Malik. I'll come back to in a moment's time. While I have Pakistan, I want to put that idea to Aziz Ahmed Khan. Aziz Ahmed Khan, you've been High Commissioner in India. You understand your country's politics. How do you respond to Krish Srinivasan's suggestion that the dialogue should be raised to the political level? It should be semi-permanent, and you need the sort of impetus and dedication that Kerry showed with the Iran nuclear deal if we're going to make progress. In other words, work at it for 18 days, non-stop if need be.
Personally speaking, I totally agree with that idea. I think, and I can dare say that Pakistan would probably welcome that idea if such a proposal was made. I think there is a need to raise the level to the political level where the two sides sit down and look at it. Where do they want to take this relationship? The officials can come later on and fill in the gaps or the details. Pakistan and India have been discussing all their outstanding issues for a very long time. I think every subject on the table in the composite dialogue has been discussed threadbare. Time has come to take political decisions on how to implement it. We took a decision in 1989 to withdraw forces from Siachen. We have never implemented that. Officials have nothing more to discuss except what the mode of withdrawal would be or timetable of withdrawal would be, but the decision has to be taken at the political level. Similarly in other areas. So it is a very good idea that the two foreign ministers, I mean the advisor foreign affairs here and the foreign minister on India's side, for example, should have a meeting, discuss all the political aspects of the issue and see what are the impediments, what are the difficulties, do it quietly but do it consistently over a long period of time. Yes, there should be no interruption. As my friend Manishankar Iyer has been saying for a long time, uninterrupted and uninterruptible dialogue. The two sides should sit down, and these little incidents on the LOC and so on, they will keep happening. These are local commanders, sometimes there are some mistakes happen. They cannot dictate policy at the political level, and they should not allow to influence policy at the political level.
General Malik,
and all as far as this.
Go ahead, Aziz Ahmed Khan. No, we've lost Aziz Ahmed Khan. I'm afraid that is the real end to that link to Pakistan. General Malik, as a former army chief, how do you respond to this suggestion from our former Foreign Secretary Krish Srinivasan that this level of dialogue needs to be raised to the political level, it needs to be semi-permanent, and it needs to happen with the sort of dedication Kerry showed over the Iran nuclear deal, if need be talk for 18 days non-stop. Otherwise, leaving it to the officials means you're simply prolonging, if not prevaricating.
Karan, while I'm accepting that kind of a dialogue taking place, but having been through Lahore Agreement and then followed, which was followed by Kargil War, I feel that you cannot totally do away without military inputs on that. You have to have the military involved in these dialogues. So whatever level, political level dialogue that you have to take into account the ground situation. You have to get your military also online. And it cannot be left out, as it happened during Lahore talks. You could make out later on that apparently Pervez Musharraf and Nawaz Sharif were not on the same page. So you have to keep everyone on the same page if you want to make some progress in this dialogue. And I would still say that while the political level dialogue is going on, do maintain the institutional arrangements that we have of maintaining peace and tranquility along the line of control and the border.
Srinivasan, what General Malik is hinting at, he's not saying it so explicitly, is that on issues like Siachen, where you heard a moment ago Aziz Ahmed Khan saying that in fact a solution had been worked out, but the Indian Army has great reservations and Indian politicians have gone by the Indian Army's reservations rather than pursue what they thought was an agreement. That on issues like that, Indian politicians need to have the gumption and the courage and perhaps the sagacity to even withstand contrary advice from their army. Would you go as far as that as well and say that maybe Indian and Pakistani politicians now need to say, look, we've taken advice from everyone, including our army. We hear that the army has contrary advice to give, but we're going ahead.
Well, precisely. I think, let's say you've summed it up very exactly. I think that obviously when the politicians meet from both sides at whatever level, very high, approved and with delegated powers, they're going to go with briefs from their country. But my suggestion is that at the official level, there's been plenty of talking in the past. Those talks are not going to get anywhere because you're not going to have the political imprimatur to those talks unless you get the politicians to meet. Now, there is some understanding between the Prime Minister of India and the Prime Minister of Pakistan as displayed in Uffa. Now, that needs to be followed up really at the political level. Certainly these three meetings can take place on, at whatever levels they've been decided. But the real heart of the matter is that there should be political will manifested from both countries and manifested in a discussion which will lead to solutions, even if those discussions have to last for a very long time, in one place, at one time and continuously.
Do you see Indian politicians, and I suppose I mean in particular this government because it gives the impression of being strong, decisive, independent and capable of acting contrary to advice it gets, if it wants to. Do you therefore see politicians of this government being able to say to the army, we hear you on something like Siachen, we know what your advice is, but eventually this is a political decision and we are going to take it and maybe we'll take it differently to what you suggest. Do you see that happening, or is it unlikely because otherwise they wouldn't have any escape if they get it wrong?
Well, so far it hasn't. So far it hasn't, and I think at the moment, if you go by the past, I don't see it happening certainly in the short term.
Not even with a leader as strong as Mr. Modi's image suggests he is?
So far, everything that you've seen indicates that this government places a greater store on the advice it gets from the military than perhaps the previous government did. The present government gives the military a much freer hand on all sides of the Indian border. And if that continues, I don't see them taking a strong line on matters as sensitive and a problem as long-standing as Siachen, for instance, or giving the Navy short shrift on Seal Creek.
General Malik, you heard Srinivasan, the former Foreign Secretary, suggest that perhaps the time has come for politicians to take their own decisions, to hear the advice they get from the army, but perhaps disregard it if they believe that is the right thing to do. And then you've heard the former High Commissioner to Pakistan, Satyabrat Pal, say that he doesn't believe this government is likely to do that. In fact, this government is more likely to follow army advice than even the previous one. Do you take comfort from that, or do you feel at the end of the day this is a political problem that politicians must have the courage to solve, and if they don't have that courage, the country will suffer, no one else?
Look, there is no doubt that the politicians ultimately they have to not only solve the problem, and if they cannot solve it, then the country will suffer. And I don't think anybody can feel that the Indian army will not accept the political decisions. I don't think, I mean, we can give our advice, but then finally the take is on the side with the political leadership. And either they convince the rest of the country, including the military, or they get convinced themselves. So I don't think there is going to be any challenge to the political decision that is taken within our country. Our institutional arrangements are very, very strong.
Okay.
But it is our job, the job of the military and others, External Affairs Ministry and others, to give candid, forthright advice. Then it is up to the political leadership to take it or leave it.
Absolutely.
And the present government is strong enough, but I think there is also, they have to look into the domestic side of it. How many people are going to oppose it? How many people are not going to like it? Their own, the opponents within the parliament, they themselves would be probably challenging whatever such decisions are taken by them.
But there is a bottom line to what you're saying, and it's echoed in a sense by what Krishnan Srinivasan said earlier, and undoubtedly also by Satyabrat Pal, which is that politicians and prime ministers in particular are put in their posts to lead. Leadership means you have to take decisions. Decisions have to be thought through carefully, but eventually you have to have the courage to stand by what you think is right, and sometimes that means you take a little bit of a risk for the sake of peace. Maybe that's what India and Pakistan need, a little bit of a risk for the sake of peace. Think about it. That may be the only way of solving a problem that's rankled for nearly 68 years. My thanks to my guests for joining me. My thanks also to our guests from Pakistan who were with us earlier. And to all of you, a happy Eid for tomorrow. Goodbye. Good night.